Welcome to The Call, an exclusive conversation hosted by the Chamber's Global Intelligence Desk. We're delighted you are able to join us. Please note the views of our guests today are not necessarily those of the Chamber, but we hope you will find those views as valuable as we do. Please feel free to put questions into the Q&A at any time, and we'll address as many as we can after the interview. Let's get started. Good morning, and welcome to The Call, brought to you by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce here in Washington. I am your host, Jay Sapsford, and here's the question of the moment. What does China's slowdown mean for its global ambitions? For years, China's booming economy fueled its influence. China's Belt and Road Initiative expanded its reach by funding railways, ports, and cell phone towers all around the world. It leveraged its role as a supply chain hub to reward friends and punish rivals. It thrived while using growing clout to reshape the global order. Today, China faces a real estate crisis, bad debt, deflationary pressures. GDP is now running below 5% at a time when its trading partners have grown tired of China's overcapacity and cheap exports. And now a debate rages. Some say China has peaked and presents diplomatic openings. Others say China is more determined than ever to pursue an agenda that is antithetical to U.S. interests. The outcome of this debate will hinge on a series of questions. Can President Xi Jinping sustain his vision of a China-centric global order? Will China's economic constraints weaken its leverage in global diplomacy and trade? And how should the U.S. react to China's slowdown? To help unpack all of this, we're thrilled to have Elizabeth Economy, Hargrove Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, author of The World According to China. Elizabeth, welcome to The Call.
Thanks so much, Jay. Great to be here.
I'd like to start with a question about your experience as a China scholar. I'm just wondering, did the severity of this downturn surprise you?
Not so much, I have to say. I think the downturn isn't really a downturn. It's just a continuation of what has been a really challenged Chinese economy. All the issues that you ticked off at the outset are issues that China has confronted for a number of years now. I think what surprised people has been the fact that China failed to have the sort of, post-COVID recovery, either a V or a W or even a U that people anticipated. But I think, over the past 2 years, we've seen China continue to struggle, I think, with all the issues that you mentioned, in addition to some increasing headwinds.
I wonder, is there a consensus among China scholars right now in the policy movements in which you move about how long this downturn is going to last?
I don't think there's a consensus necessarily about how long the downturn is going to last, because I think there are people who still believe that the Chinese government is going to get it right, that Xi Jinping is going to take the steps that are necessary, for example, to boost consumer spending. But others think that he's locked into a sort of a playbook from which he simply can't seem to move. And so I think people are of two minds about whether or not China's going to get back onto a reform and opening track with regard to the economy, or whether they're just stuck with the playbook that they have right now.
Well, as you laid out in your 2022 book, that playbook, President Xi's effort to reshape China and the world to better suit its interests, I'm just wondering, if the slower economy, does that restrict his options?
So far, we haven't seen that. And I think it's really interesting because this is a debate in Washington today. There are a lot of people, I think, running around saying that because China's economy has slowed so significantly, because it faces so many constraints and international headwinds, that in fact China is being forced to retrench. But when I look at, for example, China's Belt and Road Initiative, if I look at China's military activities on the global stage, if I look at the extent to which Xi Jinping continues to sort of produce and pursue big global initiatives like the Global Development Initiative and the Global Security Initiative, his efforts to de-dollarize the global economy, I don't see any sort of moderation in Xi Jinping's ambitions or in his ability at this point in time to pursue those ambitions.
Okay, if you've just joined us this morning, this is The Call, a regular video conversation in which we address the geopolitical issues of our time. Today, we are discussing China's place on the global stage given its slowing economy with Hoover Institution's Elizabeth Economy. Please feel free to put questions in the Q&A. I wonder, now, China has been a crucial piece of the world's supply chain, and Beijing has used that as leverage. Will it be harder for China to continue to use that as leverage in the weeks and months ahead?
I mean, I think Xi Jinping has this vision of dual circulation, which is in part the idea that China's economy is large enough that China can innovate, manufacture, and consume within itself. It will continue to export. And as you're saying, it wants the international community to remain dependent on China for parts of its supply chain. I think in some respects that dependence is going to continue because China is, for example, such a large both supplier and processor of many rare earths and minerals that we need for, things like automobiles, everything from automobiles to defense products. So I think that element of China's supply chain will continue. I think other parts, though, we've seen a pretty significant diminution in terms of overseas foreign investment into China. If you look at the levels from 22 to 23 to 24, you see a pretty steep, decline in the trajectory. And so I think there are concerns for multinationals about continuing to invest as much in China for lots of different reasons. Part of it is the sort of weak consumer base, but I think increasingly other kinds of regulations that China's putting in place, the raids that we've seen on American companies and consulting firms, the lack of really good information, economic information. So I think there are a number of reasons why multinationals are becoming more concerned about China as an investment environment. So I think that element of China as sort of a center point for the world supply chain, I think will over time diminish. That being said, we are still greatly dependent on China.
Yes, and it's got just a world-class manufacturing base, and to get its way out of this, I just wonder if it's going to use that manufacturing base to try to export its way out of this economic challenge that it faces at a time when the rest of the world is growing less and less willing to let China just run roughshod over their markets.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, we've seen the pushback, for example, on EVs and other parts of the sort of clean tech ecosystem. Not just the European Union and the United States and Canada pushing back, but also countries like Brazil and India saying they don't want to be swamped by Chinese clean tech exports, and they want to develop their own domestic industries. And I think if we look back to 2015, when China announced Made in China 2025, which was its program to have Chinese companies dominate in 10 areas of critical technology, EVs being one of them, but also new materials and a whole range of products, AI. I think if we look at across those 10 sort of technologies, those sectors, we'll see that this is the exact same game plan that China has for all of them. So I think we should anticipate that whether it's medical devices or legacy semiconductor chips, the world is going to be faced with China's efforts not only to dominate, Chinese companies not only to dominate domestically, but to become global champions and export its overcapacity.
Now, you mentioned the Belt and Road a little earlier. I note that 150 countries around the world have signed up to this. China has used this to, extend financing upwards of $1 trillion at this point. And it has also used this as leverage to help try to align other countries' priorities and policies to its own vision of the world. Is that sustainable? Can China keep sort of financing at this level?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, China's financing, China's overseas investment in the Belt and Road Initiative, peaked in 2016 and then sort of steadily declined, but it is back in 2023, back up to 2018 levels. So I think, investment was about 50 billion this year. So I think it's a mistake to think that this is the end of the Belt and Road. I think what we're seeing, Xi Jinping announced a couple of years ago that it was shifting to a sort of small is beautiful mantra. And I think what that means is it's becoming much more targeted in terms of the industries that it targets for investment. So what we see is a high priority on clean energy, a high priority on the digital Silk Road element of it. So fiber optic cables, e-commerce, satellite systems, cloud. And I think a priority on mining, right? Because China wants access to the minerals that it needs to continue to fuel its economy. So those are the three priority sectors. And then we see priority target countries. And so, Africa for mining, it's going to the Middle East for, energy, and then Southeast Asia. So I think those are the three priority areas. So it's being more strategic. It doesn't want to have the big, presidential palaces that just increase, the debt that these emerging economies have to, pay to the Chinese over time. So I think that's the shift that we're seeing right now in terms of the thinking in Beijing. But I don't think we should think that it makes them less competitive. I think that this shift actually makes them more competitive for the United States.
So does that mean that they're going to be deprioritizing some of the areas where they've been active up until now? Certain areas where I know that the Belt and Road was used as a way to export some of the excess capacity in its construction industry. That seems to me like that's even worse now that you have this downturn in the real estate market and there's less sort of infrastructure investment domestically. I just wonder what things look like on that front.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's going to depend on the country. So, for example, they have pledged to help and Vietnam sort of enhance and improve its infrastructure, its roads, its railways, its ports, et cetera. So I think it's country dependent. China will continue to look for opportunities to export overcapacity, in all areas. But again, it will be targeted and done in sort of smarter ways, I think, than it's been done before. I think in terms of deprioritizing, I think South Asia is being deprioritized, as an area. It had a huge program in Pakistan that has not, proved to be beneficial either for Pakistan or for China. And so that's something where we're seeing, China pull back, I think.
A part of that investment has also been sort of helping countries develop what I call the surveillance state, using some of this technology to suppress dissent and that sort of thing. You had mentioned in one of your writings that there are some like 36 countries that had taken advantage of these programs. I wonder if you could just expound on that a little bit.
Right. So I think it's important to recognize that the Belt and Road Initiative, while it started as a hard infrastructure initiative back in 2013, it has morphed and evolved, into the Digital Silk Road, the Green Silk Road, the Polar Silk Road, the Health Silk Road. And on top of that, there is a big political dimension to this. Xi Jinping very much believes that through this investment, there are opportunities for China to share its political model. Back in 2017, when at the party Congress, he gave a big speech where he talked about the fact that he believed China had a model that other countries could emulate. And so, yes, companies like Huawei, which are basically now I think 70% of the telecom infrastructure in the emerging economies is now provided by Huawei. They will offer support for countries that are interested in learning how to, monitor their populations, go after dissidents or opposition leaders, track them. So they have cybersecurity training seminars. Huawei technicians will provide that support. So there is that element to it. And beyond that, China has set up opportunities like a, governance training seminar, governance training facility in Tanzania, where countries in Africa and East Africa can go and learn the China model. How do you have a strong one-party system, for example? So I think there are, China's looking for ways to share its model, again, with countries that are interested. It's not the imposition of the model. This isn't the Soviet Union. It's the export of its model.
And so there's some agency on the part of those who are receiving this. They're actually willing participants in this. It's not like the national equivalent of a predatory lender or something that just forces itself into a country's economic ecosystem. Am I right about that?
Correct. And I think that's a really important point to make because initially there was a lot of rhetoric around China's debt trap diplomacy, for example. And I think that that's not really the right way to look at it. I don't think China went out with the Belt and Road Initiative with an eye for, encouraging countries to become financially dependent on them in a way that was really unsustainable. Because now China's in the very uncomfortable position of trying to renegotiate a lot of these, a lot of this debt with these countries. And, frankly, that produces tensions with these countries. It doesn't, enhance China's leadership position in the sort of among the emerging and middle income economies.
Okay, we've got some questions coming in from our audience members, one of which is very interesting. Does a slump weaken China's ability to pursue its sovereignty claims?
I think if there's one area that Xi Jinping is absolutely committed to, it is the pursuit of what he has termed his core interests. And so in the first instance, that means Taiwan and the South China Sea and Hong Kong. But Hong Kong, effectively has now been, made close to just another Chinese city. So that leaves the South China Sea and Taiwan. And not only have we not seen China step back from its efforts to assert sovereignty, in fact, it has enhanced its efforts. So we see more military activity around Taiwan, more military activity and more aggressive activity with regard to the Philippines, for example, recently. So I think when it comes to its core interests, Xi Jinping has said, that the basically reunification with Taiwan is one of his 14 must-do items for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. So I think this is a central objective of his, at least if not necessarily to take Taiwan by force. I think that's a last option, but he definitely wants to see a move toward greater Chinese control, greater Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan.
And here's another related question. Does China's weaker economy hurt its ability to project military power overseas? I guess the answer to that is no, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, over time, if China's economy continues to grow at what, some Chinese economists are saying is not 5%, like the Chinese government asserts, but, 2 or 3%. I mean, there are some American economists who say it's as low as 0% or 1%. I think if this continues, it's possible that the growth in military spending will, attenuate a little bit. But again, I think for China's priority areas, like Taiwan, like the South China Sea, I don't think we're going to see any diminution in activity. What we have seen, I think, is, China had, beginning in 2013 or so, ambitions to increase the number of bases because it had never had bases overseas, military bases overseas. And as part of the Belt and Road Project, it did develop its first military logistics base in Djibouti. And it's talked about bases in Cuba, in the UAE, in about 10 different countries. And we've really seen it make progress only in Cambodia, I think, to date. So I think there's a slowing of that ambition, perhaps. Bases are expensive, they're difficult to negotiate. So maybe that's one area in terms of the projection of military force where we see China taking a little bit of a step back.
So Liz, in your view, how should the U.S. respond to this change in China's economic fortunes? And I guess this is related to the debate that's going on among China scholars about whether or not China's economy has peaked or not. I just wonder if you might be able to share some of your insights into this contentious issue about how we should treat China at this moment.
Yeah. So I'm going to make maybe 2 points. I think one, this is not the time to take our foot off the gas pedal and say, oh, we can relax because China's economy is slowing, and so the steps we've put in place, our economy is going to continue to be number one, China's going to be number two, maybe even a more distant two. I don't think that's the way it works. I think we should think of China's economy as 2 economies. One, an economy that has 600 million people living on $150 a month or less, and 2, an economy that is incredibly innovative, right? That has an incredible manufacturing ecosystem, as you mentioned earlier, that has always has the ability to surprise us, right? China started its new energy vehicle program in 1999. It took till 2024 for the world to see what it was capable of doing, but now it dominates in sales globally in EVs, and that's true with batteries. We just saw the Chinese AI company DeepSeek, right, surprised everybody by coming up with a very sophisticated model that didn't rely on U.S. open weight models. So I think it would be a big mistake for us to just assume that this overall slowdown, this slump, in some way made China overall less competitive for the United States or less ambitious. So in terms of what I think we need to do, I think number one, we need a vision for where we want our country to be in 2030 and in 2050, because we are constantly in the position of simply defending the current rules-based order as opposed to articulating a vision that can compete with China's vision. China has a vision of the international system and a vision for where China sits in that system. I don't think we have that. And I also think we need to do a better job of engaging with the global majority. I think, we need to weave them into our own net. We need to, with that vision, we need to explain to them why it makes sense, right, to align with the United States, why it makes sense to support some form of, democratic values, or barring that, just good governance. So I think there's a lot of work for the United States left to do in terms of competing with China. I will say, however, that I think it is important for us to continue to talk to China, to maintain channels of communication, to try to cooperate on areas where we have common interest. I think closing those channels, leads to, I think, miscommunication, can lead to mistakes, and ultimately, and sort of would heighten the potential for us to devolve into some kind of kinetic conflict. So I hope that the next administration will maintain the channels that the Biden administration established, or even expand upon them.
Well, that's our final question for you. What single thing should we be watching to sort of get an idea of where the direction of the U.S.-China relationship is going as you look forward?
There's only one thing to watch: Xi Jinping and Donald Trump.
Wow. Okay. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Our audience has had their morning shot of informational espresso, so we'll leave it there and tackle the day. Let me thank Elizabeth Economy, Hargrove Senior Fellow and co-chair of the program on U.S., China, and the World at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and author of The World According to China. Liz, thank you so much for swinging by.
Thank you, Jay.
If you'd like to reach out to our guest, please see her email under the resource bar at the bottom of your screen. And a warm thank you to you, our members, for joining us today. If you aren't getting our regular email invitations to the call or to our newsletter, The Lead, please send us an email at globalintel@uschamber.com and we will add you to the list. And you can also let us know if you have any other themes you would like us to cover. We're planning many shows in the coming weeks and months. We welcome your suggestions and feedback. This has been The Call, brought to you by the Global Intelligence Desk of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, asking the right questions to navigate uncertain times.